Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Sharon Soliday. She is a serial entrepreneur, passionate advocate, and for kids uh, understanding personal finance, and she's also an author. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
You are welcome to the show. Sorry for this. This slip of tongue. Actually, many a times, what I write, sometimes I myself is not do not find it legible while reading, and sometimes I have to do that. So sorry for that, audience. So let's talk about now. Coming back to Sharon, about a bit about your journey. From a speech language pathologist to being a serial entrepreneur. Help us a bit from your background so that people can learn from your journey itself.
Absolutely. I was born in the US and grew up in California. I came from a low income family. And so I really knew all I heard growing up as far as financial advice. The most important thing was don't ask for anything and save your own money. And so I was always a kid who had a job and was trying to earn money to save for my own clothes or special treats or whatever the situation might be. And knew that in order to move from that situation, school and education was really going to be the key to my success. So I ended up finishing K-12. I did 2 years at what we call a community college here in the States because it's less expensive. I worked two jobs in order to pay for that and my expenses. Transferred to a state college, finished, went to graduate school, and finished with a degree in speech language pathology. And what that means is it's a field where you work with children or adults who have communication disabilities. So if someone has a stroke, we might work with them to help them regain language. And if they're children, they might have some learning disabilities that we can assist with, or articulation issues with their speech. So that's kind of what I thought I would do professionally. And I was always an entrepreneur as a kid. I was in high school. I was undercutting the student store. They used to sell big chocolate chip cookies, but they sold them for $2, and that was crazy to me. So I started bringing them in shoe boxes and selling them for just $1, and until I got called into the principal's office, and he said, "Yeah, that ends today because we rely on that money to fund our sports, and you cannot be doing this." So that was my first run-in with government, I like to describe it as. So I stopped doing that, but I'd earned quite a bit of money, and I was always doing that little side hustle even when I was in college doing different things. But once I became a speech language pathologist, I was in that profession for 10 years, and I worked in pediatrics with kids. And then by then I had my own daughter, and my husband and I each worked less than full time in order to keep her out of full time care. And we were a family who had just the one car, and we really budgeted our money. And financially, we were very conservative to live within our means. But we were kind of excited when she was starting school. Then we would both work full time again because she would be in school. And when we looked around, I couldn't go back to my employer because she didn't need to be in school till like 8:30, and I had to be at work between 7:30 and 8. So I ended up going into my own contracting work, and I found with more clients and more demand, that's when I just started hiring people to work under my own umbrella. And that business really took off and grew. And I had it for 17 years. At year 10, I decided I really wanted to scale it to have a valuation high enough to make it worthwhile to sell. And that's what I did. That was 2 years ago. I sold it, and it gave me the gift of now this being retired pretty early. And so I'm feeling very fortunate in that regard. And I thought, okay, well, what do I want to do now? And my real passion is child development and personal finance. I'm the one in our family that's talking to nieces and nephews and cousins and, reminding everyone, like, okay, here's how you can save your money. Here's how you can invest your money. And I thought, why not write a book? So here's my not subtle pitch, but I wrote Cradle to Credit, which are money lessons starting at birth to 18 years. And so it's not only what to teach your child according to child development at each age, but really how to do it and how to have that conversation. Because one thing that I think, whether or not you give your kids everything they ask for or you tell them they can't have anything, that doesn't neither of those really teach kids anything. So and too many kids don't know how to manage money and think about money and currency and their own credit and how to protect how to manage their debt, or what kind of debt is good and what kind is bad. And so I go over all of that in sort of child friendly terms. And right now it's a bit of a passion project, as you might say, that I'm chasing.
Right, right. We'll come to the book part also, Sharon. But first, to understand for the audience itself, for a lot of people who can suddenly have some sort of a money in hand from whatever reasons, either from as a bonus from job or from some property sale or from, and it is becomes at that point in time very difficult to decide what to do with that money. And so I want to understand for the audience from you, what did you do with the money, so that through that understanding they can also get some idea for whatever money they may have gotten today, or maybe in the future. Everybody gets a chance to get some money in their hands from one way or the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is such an interesting question. No one's asked me that. I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm not going to tell other people what to do. But here's what I did so I can share my own journey. I
Right.
really looked at what are our expenses and what debt do we have coming or that we want to pay off and get rid of. And so that was my priority in paying that off. My daughter had just started graduate school, and I had told her, you're going to be on your own. I helped her with college the first 4 years, but the second, but I can't do the graduate school. Well, then I sold my business. And so I'm like, okay, I can help you with school. And for myself, I don't believe that you should live your life in deprivation. I think you really should have some of the fun things that you shouldn't always just put your money in savings or just put it away for a rainy day. So I think you have to find a balance. And for some people, if they put $1 in savings, they want to spend $1 on something fun, and, good for them. But I think you have to find the balance you're comfortable with. I do feel it's important to put some away in savings. And if you want to invest it, there are many different options that you can look at. I personally believe real estate is a really a valuable investment to consider because it's a way to create passive income that will return back to you. I look here in the US, I invest also in the stock market and a lot of different kinds of funds that mature at different times. So I think it comes down a bit to, how much money you might have that you come into, and what is your comfort level in deciding what you can save versus what you can spend. When I started my business, my husband and I had to sit down and say, what is our boundary? How much are we willing to risk financially before we pull the plug and say this isn't working? And we had decided, okay, we were willing to spend our savings, and we were two very financially frugal people, but we were willing to spend savings. Depending on the situation, we might be willing to tap into retirement funds, but absolutely we would not tap into our own home. Like, we didn't want to risk the roof over our family's head. And so for us, that was a firm boundary. And I think people really have to explore what is their relationship with money. How often do you might get this extra money? That is, this a once in a lifetime, or is this something that you get a bonus every year and you want to do something with it? And then to make a plan in advance of How do you want to make this money work for you?
Right, right, Sharon. Now, in terms of parents, in terms of kids, you talk about essential money skills.
Hmm.
What is essential? Sometimes it's very difficult to decide what essential is. Sometimes you may be talking about money too much when the child is not ready, or you may be talking too less because you don't know about it. Secondly, a lot of parents may have money, so should they tell their children about that they are very rich? How should they convey that part to their children? Because it can have a negative effect also if they put it. And for people who have less money, should they tell them, okay, we are broke, we do not have money? How should they? Because then that will leave a lasting impression, for the kid. How should one do that? What is your understanding? You have worked with kids, you know about these things. Tell us a bit about this. How do you handle this part?
Well, that is such a perfect question. I feel like you teed that up perfectly because I feel that money is such a taboo topic. Whether you have money or you have no money, parents are very hesitant to talk to their children about how much money the family has, how the family chooses to spend it. And some of that, I think, is your personal approach and your feelings, like what are we comfortable. And honestly, some kids you don't necessarily, depending on maturity level, want to share everything with every one of your kids at the same time. But if let's start with your first question. If you have money, if you
Right,
or the first scenario, if you have money, I think the concern is that if we tell our kids how much money we have, they're going to tell their friends, they're going to
right,
get lazy and not want to work for their own money. But if you really want your money to have a lasting generational longitudinal experience with your family, if you want your money to move just beyond you and your kids to your grandkids or future generations, you have to start talking with kids about, we're very fortunate, we work very hard, we're very blessed, we have this money, and this is how we protect it, this is how we take care of it, this is how we invest it. And you want to start those conversations when kids are young enough to understand. I tell this story about my daughter. When she was only 6 or 7 years old, we used to play make believe, where, we'd play, mailman in the house who deliver different letters to the pet, we played,
right,
all sorts of make believe games. And and I was always describing how different businesses worked, and she said, well, I want to play bank. How does a bank work? And so I said, okay, well, and I described the idea of loans and interests. And so we played that for a little bit, where she's writing out pretend loans to me and charging an astronomical amount. Here's $5. I want $1 back immediately. So I said to her afterwards, I said, you seem to have fun playing with that. Do you think you might want to grow up and be a banker one day? And she was quiet for a minute and she
right.
goes, Mom, I think I should be the bank. And I laughed out loud
Right,
and I said, you're exactly right. You do want to grow up and be the bank. But the idea is that you want to teach your children, if you have that resource in your life, you're clearly doing something right. And you want to not surprise them with that at 18, that, or at 25, like, oh, by the way, where they come to just expect financial gifts, like, oh, I'm getting married, so I'll take this money, or, oh, I'm going to college, I'll take this money. That they don't know, is there a lot of money I may be getting in the future or just a little bit? I think it's okay to start having those conversations of parents, like, we plan to help with school, we plan to help with the first home. After that, we expect you to be working full time. I think it's very appropriate to set out those boundaries, but you also have to teach them, like, how you're choosing to invest so that they can start learning about that, so when the opportunity comes, because the idea is that part of your wealth will transfer to them at some point, and God forbid you die, something happens to you early, you don't want that just to land in their lap unprepared. Now, on the
Right.
flip side, if you don't have any money, I actually think this is an easier situation because a lot of families, are working very hard and they're feeling like they're just not getting ahead. And maybe some may have some debt, like from credit cards or investments or different poor decisions in the past. And they're very guarded about wanting to tell their kids about that. It's hard to humble yourself and share your mistakes with kids. But that is rich information that they are never going to learn in school. They are never going to learn from their friends or anywhere on the internet. It's going to really come from the heart if you can sit down with your kids and say, and if you don't have any money, your kids typically know, like that's not
Right.
going to be a surprise to them. The good news is I talk with lots of teens and young adults, and the kids who come from a very low income background, they are the kids who have the most hustle. They are the kids willing to take on a second job. They know what it's like not to have something, and they're not afraid. I find those kids, you should be excited if you're that family because your kids know what it's like to go without. And so they are willing to take a risk to try something new, to try a business or to try a training program, or because they have already been in a place they don't want to be again. And so they only have upside to take a chance versus a lot of middle class kids and families and upper income families. Their kids talk to me very directly about being very fearful of taking a risk. They are very fearful of losing security. They talk more about security than any other group of people that I work with. And it can be hard. You have to, part of the money conversation is explaining to kids when is something a risk, when is something an emergency, so that they can start to not just live in fear of like, I don't want to lose mom and dad's money, I don't want to screw it up. And therefore they never take a chance. And, it just filters away after a while.
Wonderful, wonderful. All I understand is whether you become a banker, or work in a bank, invest your money in a way so that you can bank on it.
Absolutely. That was beautiful. Well done.
Thank you, Sharon. So now, how do then you talk about the 6 money facts parents should teach their kids? What are these things? That will be a lot helpful to a lot of parents.
Absolutely. The first one I suggest you start with is you really have to reflect on your own values. And this often comes from our own childhoods and our own parents. As adults, we have to think about, what am I bringing to the table? Am I someone who is very conservative with money and is very afraid to teach kids to go out and start your own business? Because to me that sounds crazy. I think in a lot of parents feel like they have to teach what a checking account is, what a banking account is, but they don't actually think about the emotional values that are tied to money and that they personally hold on to. And believe me, kids are so different that your values are going to emerge those discussions in different ways with different kids. I have one nephew who I took two nephews and a niece to a store. And I said, I'm going to give you $50 each. You can buy anything you want. It was a big shopping day with Auntie Sharon. I was visiting. And they went in, the two of them said, oh, right, and wanted to take off to the toy section. And the third one says, what about the tax? Does that $50 include the tax, or is that after the tax? And this
Wonderful.
was a little kid who was already thinking about taxes and was aware of like what happens when I get to the register with my items. And he is much further along in his awareness of money than with the other two. And it made me laugh and warm my heart. And I told him, don't worry, I'll cover the tax. But the idea is I had to sort of sit back and think, wow, I'm going to have a different conversation with the other two versus this kid who's ready for a little more. And what is important to me, and would that be important to him, and how to share that. So the first is really suggesting you have to, reflect on your own values and decide what to pass along. The second step I would encourage is really sit down and look at your own financial budget. Do you have a checking account? Do you have investment accounts, savings accounts? Do you know where your own money goes? And that's sort of a personal inventory of how do I be aware of my own money? A lot of times we tell our children, no, I'm not spending money on that. There's no money for that. But it really helps them to understand, well, where does our money go as a family? And so you have to know the answer to that first. So really the second step is to figure out how to get your own ducks in a row and learn what you may not know. And that's okay if you don't know it. The third step is really the basics of understanding, what do I want my kids by the time they get to roughly 20? Because even 25, kids are not done cooking at 18. Their brains are still developing until their mid 20s. And in their 18 to 25, their brains are developing really most significantly that decision making piece of how to make good, complicated decisions based on values they've learned growing up. And so I feel you have to say, okay, what is it as a family and to sit down with a child? Here's what we want you to know by the time you're 20. You don't have to tell them that when they're 4, but have an idea of where are we going in this conversation. And then I'm a firm believer in those last 3 steps have to include sort of your basic finance, your household budget, and then investments. And then what are you going to do with the future? Like what do you do with surprise money? And this also comes into play when I talk about the family budget and investments. Along the way, you're also talking about what is insurance, and how that is a financial product, and you're spending money for it. And also learning the difference between an emergency expense versus a want or a need. And I think those conversations are all embedded into more complexity as kids get older. So I hope that answers your question and can provide some sort of benchmark post for parents as they're considering what to share with kids.
Absolutely, absolutely, Sharon. And I want to understand, you talk about that sometimes, adults can get in the way of kids trying to thrive.
Yeah.
How is that? How does that happen? If you can give any example.
Well, sure. I think it's always all parents want our kids to have a successful life. We don't want our kids to have hardship and struggle. And because of that, sometimes we're quick to intervene. And, maybe moms are more this way. I don't know. We want to make the path a little easier. And when you make that path a little easier or try to solve problems for kids, they never get a chance to struggle with it and figure it out themselves. And so really it feels like you're doing kids a favor, but whether they're looking for a job or contemplating moving out, looking at their first apartment, or even back early in high school, how to budget their time in order to manage a part-time job and their studies. You might have lots of opinions as a parent, but it's also okay to let your kids try something and let them fail. That feels like, oh my God, my kid failed. But in reality, they learned a great deal. They'll learn more from failure than they will ever learn from success. I am not saying that you should always let your kids fail and just, let them raise themselves to figure it out. But sometimes we often as parents are trying to do too much. And sometimes it's okay to just listen and ask their opinion of how things went and not necessarily tell them our opinion, which is so much harder said than done. But it's a suggestion.
Absolutely, absolutely, Sharon. Now coming to your book, Cradle to
Credit.
what? Yeah, Cradle to Credit. I told you, I sometimes, because I'm traveling, I'm not carrying all printer, and also I write sometimes, and sometimes it becomes illegible to, especially if it is morning time. So
I
Cradle
know
to,
that I know the feeling. That happens with me all the time.
yeah, so from cradle, because you lose that habit of writing nowadays because of the use of computer, but you have to do if you are traveling. So Cradle to Credit, money lessons from birth to 18. What is this book about, and who is this book for? Is it for the kids, or is it for the parents or educators?
I'm finding it's for all of the above. And here's in my fantasy world, I would love every new parent to get a copy at a baby shower so that they can be reading like what to anticipate to talk about, talk to kids about, because every chapter is a year in a child's life. So like I have birth to 1, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 4. Here's what you have to be thinking about and talking about. But more importantly, I do talk about, how to do that, because with child development, you can't just tell kids everything. You wouldn't tell kids something at 3 and describe it the same way at 6. You actually come back to similar topics over time, and they get more complicated as kids become more mature and their brains develop. But you have to start planting those early seeds. So the book really talks about what over those 18 years do you want to cover? And I include everything from, earning a living and taxes to insurance to how do you adult and what happens with contracts when you sign a contract to financially obligate yourself. So all of that kind of information is in there. And yet it's really in simple language. So I've had some parents told me that they've had their kids, start to read it and then report back to them. So some kids like to just feel they've gotten some information, but they want to fill in some holes that they didn't get from their family. So they've read it and they've appreciated that. I have had other new parents say, I can't believe, like, you get the baby books that tell you when your kids are going to crawl and walk and say their first words. And then after that, you're off and running, and but you have to be intentional about money. Otherwise, you're a slave to the decisions you make if they're not educated ones, and the results can be poor. So I find grandparents are really liking the book because they reach back to me and I've gotten a couple of messages that said, I wish I had taught my kids this, but they have more time and sometimes a little more money to talk to their grandchildren about, like, well, here's decisions that we made. And sometimes grandparents and kids can have an easier conversation than parents because they're not busy trying to also raise them. So it's really for anybody. I think you'll get different pieces of it. Here in the States, you get your driver's license around 16 years. And a lot of kids at 15 are chomping at the bit to get a car and drive. That's all they're thinking about, getting a car and driving. And parents are like horrified at the thought that this child might be getting a car and driving at some point.
Right.
But there's a lot of financial information related to owning a car and what you have to think about. And on my website, I've actually made that entire chapter just a free download for anybody who's interested, as an example of the book of kind of how I lay information out. And there's lots of different visuals, but there's a lot of insurance terms you have to know when you're considering owning a car. And I think that helps educate kids as to the seriousness of and the responsibility of driving and what you have to take into account. So, I would encourage anybody, if they kind of wanted to see it for themselves, that's a free download. And you can get that by going to my website, SharonSoliday.com. And then under my journal section, you can click on that and you'll find it easily right there.
Wonderful, wonderful. There is so much to learn from you, Sharon, and I'm sure a lot of people will learn so much from your book, from your life itself, and from the all the wonderful tips that you have shared. So, for those people who would like to connect with you, what is the best way for them to do so?
The best way is through my website, and there is a way to send me a message through that. And I do talk to young entrepreneurs, teens, and young adults. Anything about business, I'll talk to kids for free. So if they want to drop me a line and ask a question, and I've had every question under the sun. So about business, or what should I study in college, or I'm not a coach. I don't stay with you long term, but if you just want to have a quick conversation or email exchange, you can reach me through my website as well. So I feel like I've been given such the privilege of where I'm at in life now that I want to give some of that back to young people.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.